So for everybody who's watching, who's listening, this is Jacky Francis Walker, who is otherwise known as the Burnout Queen, who is a psychotherapist and coach based you're in Harley Street, aren't you? And
I,
specializing in burnout.
I
Yeah.
was in Harley Street up until
Mhm.
the pandemic, but since then I work remotely.
I see. Okay. 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 So thanks for joining me, Jacky. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I maybe just starting kind of at the beginning a little bit. I wonder whether you could just give me a little description of what burnout is as you see it.
Okay, well, there's many different definitions of burnout. I think the one that for me holds the most water is to recognize the fact that there is a physical component in the body that, for me, differentiates burnout from stress. So our adrenal glands, which are on top of our kidneys, produce stress hormones, which is then stored in an adrenal reservoir. And we draw from that reservoir every day in navigating the ordinary or extraordinary challenges of the day. So thinking and focusing and remembering, making decisions and meeting stressful situations, having to really push to get through something, all of these draw from the adrenal reservoir. So in the early days, the reservoir is full. So if we're in a stressful situation, we know that we can just pull out the stops, push on through, and just draw a little bit extra from the adrenal reservoir, and we will be fine. And then whew, take a couple of days off, we can bounce back. But there comes a point where the adrenal reservoir is depleted, it goes too low, there isn't enough in it to sustain what we need to do. That, for me, is the point at which we enter burnout, because then we don't have the hormonal support to do our ordinary everyday tasks. So short-term memory goes, ability to focus goes, we've got brain fog. We can't take information in as easily, we can't make decisions as easily. And quite often people will feel more emotional or more emotionally vulnerable, exhausted, and a whole heap of other symptoms as well. So this is why burnout is actually more serious than stress, because it isn't just a matter of taking a little bit of time off to recover. You actually need quite a lot of time off, and quite often it takes a good 2 months or 3 months to turn burnout around, and even more if you get more deeply into it. But the recovery time doesn't start until you create the right conditions for it to start. So if your head, for example, is still going like this the whole time, even though you're physically off from work and you're resting, that doesn't start the burnout clock ticking.
Okay, so talking about those conditions, I mean, obviously you've got years of experience in this area, but I wonder if you could just briefly dip into your bank of knowledge and just share a few pointers or tips on how you start creating those conditions and combating burnout.
Okay, I would say the number one thing that you need to do is to find a way to switch your brain off, to let it just put everything down, even if it's just for a short period of time. A recent study said 5 minutes actually is enough to get a beneficial effect from. So if you did put everything down for 5 minutes, several times a day, you're really going to be helping yourself begin to turn things around. If you can take longer, perhaps go and do something nice, or go for a nice walk in nature, or get involved in a hobby where you can just put the cares of the world down, then that's great too. And I think the other thing is really in the recovery stage is to look very carefully at what expectations you've got about what you can actually manage to do. So you might well need to delegate some of what you're trying to do, or even decide that it can wait and just not do it at all, do it less frequently. Or it might be that it actually really isn't that essential at all. So cutting down your expectations of what you can do is really useful, because your batteries are run down. If anyone's seen the famous battery ad where they've got two toys, one with the brand batteries and one with the competitors' batteries, and competitors' batteries are winding down to not moving at all, whereas the brand batteries are still going strong. At this stage in burnout, you've got the batteries which are completely out of power. So you might think when you start out at the beginning of the day, you can do loads of things. You'll soon run out of steam. If you're not careful, you'll just push yourself deeper burnout by trying to draw more too much of that. So it's really about noticing how much you can actually do without draining the tanks, and being realistic about your expectations of yourself because of that. So those are two really, really big things that get the right conditions starting. I usually find, though, and I don't know if you find this too, that a lot of people who find themselves in a state of burnout are there because it's become habitual to work too much, to always be doing, to feel uncomfortable if they stop doing, and their brain's always going, and of course they're always on their phones or digital devices, which also put an extra load on the brain and the body. So quite often I need to take them through a process for the first few months where we can actually match what they're physically and mentally able to do with what they're actually going to do, so that we can lead them very gradually back up to full strength, full power.
I see, rather than going cold turkey, say.
Well, if you can go cold turkey, that's fine, but most people can't go cold turkey because they feel uncomfortable about just stopping and taking time off. They don't know how to switch their brain off because they're so used to getting it plugged in and keeping it whirring the whole time. So usually I have to teach them how to do that. And help them devise a routine that will support them, that will help to help them build their adrenal tanks back up without draining them immediately. So it's about devising a schedule or routine that will work in that direction. And if they're still having to keep on with work as well at the same time, which is quite an interesting tightrope to walk in terms of keeping the tanks boosted, then they need guidance all the way along, so, because it isn't intuitive about what to do. And I work with a lot of high achievers who are used to getting things done and pushing through and ignoring if they're tired, because they know that they just have to do a bit more to get to the goal. And that's great in terms of getting to the top at work. But if you're in a state of burnout, that is exactly the sort of thing that's going to drive you further into it. So we have to undo the intuitive way of dealing with it and actually teach them the proper way of dealing with it that will help them get the fastest pathway out.
I guess it's like coiling a very tightly wound spring.
It can be indeed, that's right. But so we have to kind of re-educate them so that they understand what kind of mindset and what kind of lifestyle pattern will support them whilst they're in burnout. And then afterwards, once they're back to being themselves again, back to normal, we then need to look at, well, okay, so what got you into this in the first place? What perhaps needs to be changed so that you don't get back here again in 6 months?
So looking long term, you've got the immediate kind of emergent, the first response strategy, and then looking further down the line, how can we sustain this?
Absolutely, because I think, particularly in today's very, very busy world, a lot of us, we've lost the natural breather spaces that used to be around in most places. So if we went on a journey, we might have read a book, but we certainly weren't playing games on the phone. We weren't bombarded by as many kind of adverts as we walk along the street as we are now. There was much more chances at work to enjoy a few moments of pause in between projects, rather than having to work at a faster pace than actually we can sustain. Everything was a little bit slower and a little bit less busy. So nowadays, I think all of us are having to find a way to keep up with the onslaught of stimuli that the world is pushing through our senses, and each of which takes a physical toll on us and a mental toll on us. So I think everyone really would benefit from upping their game in terms of how they deal with the demands of their daily life. There's a lot of much cleverer ways now of dealing with all of this, so that it doesn't have as much as an onslaught on us.
Mm-hmm. And you recommend a phased exit strategy from that pace of life that we've become accustomed to.
That isn't going to suit everyone.
Mm-hmm.
There's some who like working in that environment, they just don't want to have as big a toll on them as it is at the moment. And there are others for whom the whole experience of burnout and turning it around will make them think very carefully, is this the life that I actually want? And in fact, I had a client just this morning who we've come to the end of the work together. He came to me because he was in burnout, working one of these high pressure, high performance jobs. And he said, my goodness, things are so different now. The pace of the job is exactly the same. And I don't mind that. I'm okay with that. But I'm reacting to it so much more differently. I can cope better. I'm calmer. I can sustain it better. So, that's just absolutely amazing. I never knew it was possible.
That's the holy grail, isn't it? That's what you want. The situation might be the same, but it's how you're reacting.
That's right. Yes, on all sorts of different levels. So mentally, emotionally, physically, in terms of resilience, in terms of how you support yourself in work and outside of work. There's quite a few kind of bits to the puzzle that we need to look at to make sure that we've got the right combination for this person. So I will always look in a very bespoke way about what they're doing to try and cope with it, how they try and recover outside of work. Quite often, a lot of our ways of recovering aren't necessarily the most helpful ones. And also what kind of things they enjoy or would like to enjoy if only they had the time. So kind of pull that together into a new set of routines or habits that work in their favour. They already are going in that direction, but we emphasize it so that we use it in such a way that it helps them recover and improve their resilience.
Jacky, thanks very much for sharing this with me.
That's my pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to